What if the pain you feel, the failures you face, and the constant feeling of dissatisfaction are not accidents at all? What if they are the natural result of a hidden force inside you, one that never rests, never thinks, and never feels satisfied? In this episode of the Failure Chronicles Podcast, we sit down for an imaginary conversation with one of the most honest and uncomfortable thinkers in the history of philosophy. A philosopher who believed that life moves between suffering and boredom, that happiness is mostly an illusion, and that our endless desires are the true source of our pain. If you have ever felt tired of wanting more, if failure has made you question the meaning of effort, or if you have wondered why satisfaction never lasts, stay with us. This conversation might not make you happier, but it may help you understand yourself more clearly. Hello, I'm Saber Moshirian, and you are watching and listening to the first part of episode 10 of the Failure Chronicles Podcast. Continuing our series of imaginary interviews with great thinkers, in this episode we want to get a little familiar with the life and ideas of Arthur Schopenhauer, the famous German philosopher. This introduction is based on general information available on the internet and my limited knowledge. These points are only meant to introduce these great figures and their ideas to learn a little from them, to get some clues. So, first, in part 1, we will briefly review the life of the famous German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and get a very simple understanding of his ideas. In part 2 of this episode, which will be released next week, we will also have a short imaginary interview with him and ask a few questions. Arthur Schopenhauer's life was very different from most people of his generation. It was as if, from the very beginning, a button called active pessimism was already turned on inside him. His story begins in the city of Danzig, which today is in Poland. In 1788, his father was a wealthy merchant, and his mother was a writer who later became quite famous. The marriage of Arthur's parents, both from rich families of that time, was completely based on their family's wishes and financial interests. Let me say this clearly from the start. Arthur did not get along well with his mother at all. There was also a slogan in their home: without freedom, there is no happiness. Arthur grew up with this idea, but he thought in a completely different way, different from his father, different from his mother, and different from his sister. A major turning point in Schopenhauer's life was the death of his father in 1805, when Arthur was 17 years old. It was a sudden death, and many people believe it was a suicide. This event deeply shook Arthur and, in a way, also solved his financial problems. It allowed him to follow his real interest, philosophy. As I said, his father came from a wealthy family and had become a successful merchant himself, leaving a large inheritance behind. So much that Arthur never needed to work for the rest of his life. Before his father's death, Arthur had been forced to work in trade for about 2 years in Hamburg. But later he deeply regretted this period. After the father's death, his mother and sister moved to Weimar in Germany, a city where many famous writers and poets like Schiller were active. Arthur eventually entered university. First, he went to Göttingen to study medicine, but he quickly realized that this was not his place. He then turned to the humanities and philosophy. He studied Plato and Kant seriously. Later, he went to Berlin and attended lectures by other philosophers, but to be honest, he did not like them much. He generally disliked the academic atmosphere of that time. He believed it was full of complicated words and empty talk, and that philosophy had moved away from its true roots. During his family visits to Weimar, he also made a connection with Goethe, the giant of German literature. Schopenhauer even wrote a book about colors, supported Goethe's theory of color, and opposed Newton's ideas. In a way, he wanted to show himself to these great figures. Another important event in Schopenhauer's life was the complete break with his mother. Arthur's way of thinking was very different from hers, and after his father's death, their relationship became worse and worse. After a serious argument, some say it even turned physical, and his mother pushed him down the stairs and threw him out of the house, Arthur left his mother. They never saw each other again, and he did not even attend her funeral. This shows that he had serious problems in his personal relationships as well. He also cut off contact with his sister, who mostly shared their mother's view. His romantic relationships with women were also mostly unsuccessful and full of problems. In AD 19, when Arthur Schopenhauer was 30 years old, he published his masterpiece, The Word as Will and Representation. In this book, he argued that the world we see is only a representation, something created by our mind. This idea was strongly influenced by Kant, especially Kant's concept of phenomenon and noumenon, two different words. Immanuel Kant believed that we have two kinds of reality. First, the phenomenon, the world we experience through our five senses, what we see, what we hear, what we touch, and what we understand. These experiences pass through our sensory filters. For example, our eyes receive light from outside, the brain processes it, and then we see an image. Kant said that these built-in filters may distort reality, and what we understand through them may not match reality as truly is. Immanuel Kant also spoke about another reality called the noumenon, or things as they are in themselves, independent of our mind. He said we cannot directly know this reality. Kant's theory has a huge impact on modern philosophy and made humans realize that our knowledge is limited and will remain limited unless we find another way or new tools to understand reality. Until then, absolute reality is beyond our reach. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by this idea and built his book on it, adding his own theories, especially his concept of the will. Schopenhauer said the world is based on two things. First, our perception of reality, which is not true reality, but a creation of our mind. And second, the will, which is the true reality of the world. This will is a blind and aimless force that drives everything forward. According to Schopenhauer, this will is the source of our suffering and misery. It exists in all living beings and pushes them toward life, toward an unclear direction, chasing empty desires that bring no real benefit, only pain and suffering. First, you look for food, then reproduction, then money, then land, then property, and the list goes on. The problem is that these desires give you a temporary goal. When you finally reach them, after much suffering, you feel a brief moment of happiness, but very quickly you start chasing the next desire. Throughout life, this will keeps pulling you forward, creating endless wanting, craving, and suffering. Schopenhauer believed that salvation lies in giving up these desires and resisting this blind force. He also pointed to art as a way to find comfort, a momentary escape from the constant suffering caused by desire. At first, the world as will and representation made no noise at all. Nobody cared about it. It was a complete failure. Schopenhauer became very angry and developed a strong competition with Hegel, another famous philosopher of that time. The book remained ignored for decades and only gained attention after Schopenhauer's death. After the failure of his book, Schopenhauer tried for a while to teach at the University of Berlin, but he failed there too. He scheduled his lectures at the same time as Hegel's, and of course, no students came to his classes. It is said that during 2 years, the only class he ever actually held was the first lecture. After that, no students attended, the classes were cancelled, and he eventually gave up teaching completely. His personal life was also full of strange stories. He had an illegitimate daughter who died in childhood. He had a relationship for a while with an opera singer. Once he had a serious fight with a neighbor in Berlin that turned violent and ended up in court. As a result, he was forced to pay that woman a pension for the rest of his life. He was not a calm person at all. In his later years, he lived in Frankfurt, became more isolated, and spent most of his time with his books. Interestingly, he loved dogs and had several white poodles, all named Atma, an Indian word meaning the soul of the world. It seemed that these dogs got along with him better than people did. Schopenhauer's daily life was very routine and disciplined. He lived very strictly, wore old clothes, and had a habit of talking out loud to himself. He loved reading, especially natural sciences. He played the flute. Every day he read the Times newspaper from London and ate at the same English-style restaurant. And of course, he took long walks with his dog, Atma. Now, let's get to his main ideas. Schopenhauer was overall a pessimistic philosopher. He said, life is like a pendulum, swinging between pain and boredom. Happiness is only a brief moment when pain stops. He even said that our very existence in this world is a mistake. The world is full of suffering again and again. But his pessimism was not just despair. He also suggested ways to deal with suffering, such as art, ethics, and a simple life with low expectations. Schopenhauer believed that true happiness is unattainable, and that trying to reach it usually leads to failure and pain. In his view, happiness is an illusion. By chasing endless desires, humans fall deeper into suffering instead of reaching happiness. He suggested that by reducing our desires and accepting life as it is, we can reach a relative sense of peace. If you look closely at Schopenhauer's ideas, you will see that they are quite similar, actually more than just a little, to Buddhist philosophy. Schopenhauer was very interested in Eastern philosophy and studied many Eastern texts. He was deeply influenced by these ideas after reading the Upanishads and became interested in Buddhism. The Upanishads are a collection of Hindu philosophical texts about spirituality, metaphysics, and the nature of reality. They were written between the 8th and 2nd centuries BCE. As I mentioned, art, especially music, was a very important topic in Schopenhauer's philosophy. He believed music was the highest of all arts because it directly expresses the will itself, not just its appearance. He said art gives us a temporary escape from the pointless striving of the will. Many great artists and composers like Wagner were influenced by him. In ethics, he also had an interesting view. He believed that the foundation of morality is compassion, the ability to feel the suffering of others. He opposed Immanuel Kant's duty-based ethics and said what truly matters is not harming others and helping them as much as possible. In this story, an interesting point is that for a very long time nobody paid attention to Schopenhauer. But around AD 51, things suddenly changed, and he slowly became famous. He wrote another book called Pararega and Paralipomena, a collection of essays on various topics. A positive review in an English magazine helped him gain recognition. Schopenhauer continued writing until the end of his life and published several more books and articles. The third edition of The World as Will and Representation was published in 1859. Finally, in 1860, this pessimistic philosopher passed away in Frankfurt. Despite being an isolated and pessimistic person, he had a huge influence on philosophy and art after him. From Nietzsche and Freud to many writers and artists, even Einstein and Schrödinger quoted him. His philosophy became a bridge between classical German philosophy and later movements like existentialism. Despite all of his pessimism, Schopenhauer gives us a wake-up call to look at life differently, to chase happiness less, and to pay more attention to each other's suffering. His legacy, as a pessimistic yet deeply thoughtful philosopher, is still alive, and his ideas are still relevant today. This was part 1 of episode 10 of the Failure Chronicles podcast about Arthur Schopenhauer and his ideas. In part 2, which will be released next week, you can hear and watch my short conversation with an AI version of Schopenhauer. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you like it, please leave a like and a comment to help us be seen and heard by more people. Thank you for your time. Take care. Goodbye.